Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now today I'm going to be reading the next 100 chapters of the Vagabond series. There's going to be like a couple more crazier arcs I'm expecting. Even better character developments to happen with obviously Musashi Miyamoto's character. The characters start popping up again, or which other ones will leave an even bigger impact. Also to see how Madahachi's character progresses alongside with Musashi's. I also can't wait to see how Musashi furthers his own training, and also how he kind of maybe gets with Otsu, or if there's something that happens with Otsu that kind of makes him even more into like a more developed person. I also want to see if Musashi will come into contact with Madahachi in the coming chapters, if they're gonna fight or if they're just gonna like become friends again and kind of maybe travel together to see like the world and everything. Once again, as you see behind me, I've put up the 6 post-it notes for me to jot down notes, or if there's like a big theme or some ideas that come to mind while reading the next 100 chapters. I'm curious to see which new topics I write down on the post-it board and see which new themes come about throughout the story. Now let's get started into the next 100 chapters of Vagabond. I just finished reading the first 25 chapters after 100, so I just ended on 125. The things that have happened so far in this short amount of chapters is insane. Meeting obviously these new characters and recurring characters, how all these characters are coming together. I want to talk about are some things that happened earlier, like around chapters 101 and 102. We're starting to get to know more and more about Musashi's past. Minusai, obviously his father, has always been the one that's kind of told him about becoming invincible. We kind of see how Musashi's kind of wanted that as well, how he's chosen people to fight against, and he's wanting to see who's next, who's the better person that's going to come in line. We also get these masters that keep coming into his life and teaching him about different ways of life. Ine, Takuan, and now obviously the Yagyu. Even though it was like kind of like a short scene, but with the Yagyu master, Musashi kind of learned pretty quickly that he obviously wasn't on par with him. There's also this level of how infinite you are. We learn about how infinite the world is and how kind of small Musashi is. In Master of the Yagyu, we see this difference of thinking in terms of being invincible versus infinite. Desire for Musashi to become invincible isn't obviously the only thing that's important. In terms of being his true self, it's something that he has to work on, and how he has to, in order to become also a better fighter and be on his level, he's gonna have to learn more about himself. The thing I want to talk about is kind of this separate journey now that's going on with Otsu and Jotaro. I want to see how they're gonna develop, maybe take a different approach in terms of how he wants to learn about life. He's gonna follow the footsteps of kind of the earlier Musashi of just kind of trying to fight anybody they could find. But obviously he wants to get back to Musashi along with Otsu, which is why they're on this journey together. Musashi's kind of learning. He was trying to do the best that he could in terms of leaving them, but now we're going to see, was that really the right choice? He's already thinking about maybe that wasn't the right decision, and he kind of wants them around again. The thing I want to talk about along with obviously Madahachi's character is the single moment of Uncle Gon's death. It could really hit me, like the fact that he gave up his own life, even though he told him earlier on in Madahachi's life that you shouldn't be risking your life for anybody else, but he ended up dying by risking his life for Madahachi. Madahachi's life has been kind of based around kind of following people and also following them to not very good ends. To be honest, how stupid his decisions have been. Clearly not learned or hasn't matured enough to see what dangers could be in his path if he hasn't seen enough. Even if he doesn't have the intention, he still puts people in harm's way. Kind of his character flaw, I guess, in terms of not making the smartest decisions, risking his own life in the process of trying to become something that he's not. And so far, I guess he doesn't have that self-confidence in himself and in his own life. This world of just wanting to be a samurai has taken him by storm because he's seen so many other stronger people around him, including obviously Takazo from a young age. The way of the sword is only seen because it's what he's seen kind of be a success in this time, even though a lot of even side characters say that the way of the sword and like these other smaller characters say that the way of the samurai is kind of going down in this time period. To see how Matahachi is trying to survive, even though he knows that there are just way stronger people out there. Another thing about Uncle Gon's death that hit me was this kind of responsibility and some level of responsibility around every decision you make, and it's gonna hit potentially not only yourself but also the people around you. Something that I love that Vagabond does, and it's something that I love in a lot of stories, especially like grand scope and epic stories, is bringing characters in and out of a story. It's done so well with the character of Baiken, the chain and sickle, and how it's kind of how Musashi's chasing this ghost and eventually find out that it was actually Suji Kaze from earlier in the story. They're both so similar in terms of always wanting to fight people, and obviously he's called the god of death, or he calls himself the god of death, because that's all he knows, and it's all that that's all he knows, and it's all that has been surrounding him in his life. It's just so well done by Inoue, bringing back these characters. These characters reintroduced, they're introduced with a different name. Obviously so far with Matahachi, he's taken on Sasaki Kojiro, and from earlier in the story we have Takazo taking on Miyamoto Musashi. Now we have Seiju Kaze taking on Baiken, and also finding out that Suji Kaze was the one that killed Baiken and kind of took his name. Rindo was kind of alone and kind of took her under his wing in terms of protecting her and kind of staying with her, kind of found a new purpose for him. After the fight, they both kind of now found this new revival for life. Musashi cutting off his fingers was kind of the way that it was supposed to go. Now by cutting off his fingers, he's no longer can wield a sword or is not going to be a good fighter. And it's kind of taking away that pressure, that desire to just want to fight, just to fight. And now he's found this new desire to stay with Rindo is what I'm guessing that's going to happen. Yeah, but this arc so far has been really good. It's just really good. And this character development of Musashi now, him contemplating of what he's going to do. Was it really worth fighting Seiju Kaze in terms of just for the thrill of it, of fighting someone new and trying to become stronger? Now he's kind of really thinking about these questions. On now with the chain and sickle is now this idea of the spiral of death and killing. Obviously living versus dying, wanting to live and trying to decide that because they're killing so many people, often these samurai in the way of the sword comes with a lot of death, and trying to find reason to live is often a hard thing for them to learn. Going into his mind, as well as Seiju Kaze's mind, of is it really worth continuing the fight and just for the sake of fighting, or is there kind of a bigger purpose for both of these characters? The other person that was kind of deeper into like the spiral of killing was Sasaki Kojiro, which is interesting because the more and more that we get about facts about this character, the more we look at Matahachi and how he's kind of the opposite of this character and hasn't like lived up to what this character is supposed to be. Are we gonna see other people that have met Sasaki Kojiro in the past interfere with Matahachi, and are they gonna try to kill him, or is this just all kind of more of just a look at the character of Matahachi and how he's just kind of like this coward, and at the same time he just doesn't know how to survive in this kind of way of life of the samurai? And like, will he find his own desires outside of the way of the sword, or is he just picking this up as a hobby and wanting to make a name for himself? So now I'm gonna continue reading. I might tap back in after I've read like around 50 chapters or so, see how the story progresses, because right now it's really fucking good. I just finished reading probably one of the best arcs I've ever read. That was Kojiro's arc. What the fuck I just read? Such a detour in the story, but at the same time also brings back so many characters that have already been shown, and also tells its own story, the actual story of Sasaki Kojiro, which is one of the most interesting characters I think in the series. But man, what a great fucking arc that was. Before I get more into detail about the Kojiro arc, I just want to touch up on the previous arc with Baki and Tsuchikage's character, reading on his own backstory, how he was kind of shackled into his brother's gang, and how he was obviously saved from his brother at a young age. At the same time, when he got trapped, and then he found out that Takazo had already killed his brother, which was kind of his calling for himself. The main reason we were introduced into Tsuchikage's character was after finding out that Takazo had killed his brother. Moving on to, obviously, Kojiro's arc. Just such a journey, man, like, and so unexpected to actually go into the story of Sasuke Kojiro. But yeah, I just took off all the posters I had back there because they were just, the rest of them were all about this arc. How we started with Kojiro, obviously as a baby. He came in a fucking boat and was saved from his father. And his father is such a great character as well, because we see him and how he's always been the type to just go by the way of the sword, and we meet him once he's older and he's kind of in like a middle-age crisis of like he's followed the way of the sword so far and has now been defeated by Ito. Early on, but also he becomes a bigger part of the whole story. Later on in the arc, he feels as though he's kind of wasted his life in a way, how he kind of feels like he lost his purpose. And we also see that how that could be a possible future for Musashi's character. This arc had everything: character development, bringing a new character into a story and kind of having his own version of his own story, and following his arc as serving almost as a parallel to Musashi's story so far. Shows how someone is kind of an outcast in his own society because he's deaf and because he can't really speak any words, at the same time could have such a passion to want to do something because he's kind of almost has no other way of living, and he is kind of what he was raised upon and devotes his whole life to the way of the sword. After Kojiro cuts off the arm of the main bandit that was attacking the village, and his dad comes to rescue him, and he sees how he ended up continuing to kill and wanting to stab the main villain. He notices that he's not going to teach him the way of the sword. Not teaching him the way of the sword, I think, made Kojiro want to learn the way of the sword even more, but this time it was more in his own way. He was always transfixed on his own body and working his way up, even though he would always do like sneak attacks against his own dad and wanting to join in with the other kids. And his dad obviously sees Kojiro as someone who could succumb to the dangers of the way of the sword, someone who just acts out of violence and pure violence. And we definitely see that throughout the arc, how the more he continues to use the way of the sword, the more violent situations he comes in contact with, and the more violent he becomes. But at the same time, he's also enjoying it, almost like, obviously, Ito says that as a game. A really interesting character because he's the first disciple of Kojiro's dad. The first time we obviously introduce, he's obviously like, I want to leave because I've already learned everything I can from you. And then once he comes back, it's like he's brought all of this experience and also has now become the teacher for Kojiro since his dad doesn't want to teach him. It's almost like he's using him for his own gain in certain situations. But Kojiro likes being used in those situations because it's going to be beneficial for him in terms of being stronger and learning even more of the way of the sword. Pretty much why he enjoys fighting, different ways to survive in the world, because he was so sheltered as a kid growing up that now that he's with Ito, he kind of learns that he can actually grow as a person instead of just staying and not really getting as much involved in the world around him. One of the big themes in this arc for me was definitely the idea of purpose given to each character and why they are in the story at those exact moments. So his dad is learning his own way of purpose, because before obviously he was just torn on the way of the sword, and now that he has a son, he wanted to protect him and his well-being. I love how, reintroduces characters within the story, especially when it comes to Sasaki Kojiro's character. The way he reintroduces Denshin Shiro and the whole Yoshi clan that we obviously met earlier on in the story with Musashi. See, eventually when we get to the Sekigahara battlefield, we obviously meet Musashi and his encounter with Sasaki Kojiro, and that was definitely one of my favorite moments in the whole story so far. Seeing them back to back, and then at the same time they face each other for a split second. You don't know if they're gonna fight each other or not, and then obviously they just go their separate ways. It just builds up so much, and it's so well done. Like, it's really, I'm just jealous at how he does this. Like, just easily bringing, it doesn't even feel forced the times he brings back these characters. It just feels kind of natural to the story, the way it progresses. They're like sneaky surprises, because I didn't really expect to see Denshin Shiro in this arc, and I didn't expect to see Musashi in this arc, because we were just following the main point of view of Kojiro and his dad. So to see all these characters coming in and out of the story this way is like, it just makes it so much better. Obviously Ito is also a master, another theme, and also a master for Sasaki Kojiro, and he kind of teaches him that you need a sense of fear and kind of survival, or kind of how Musashi was learning earlier on, that you have to put your whole life on the line when it comes to fighting as a samurai. He often felt like he was being numb, especially in the fight against Denshin Shiro. Like, once he got wounded, it was like that moment of like, yeah, you could get hurt, needing that fear to live life, because that's a common theme throughout the story, is obviously living and dying, and you need the sense of survival and the sense of living. In order to live, you need kind of this fear of dying. That's one of the topics that remains throughout the story, which I really like. So I just finished reading the last couple chapters up to 200. We're back at the duel with Musashi. RP to Seijuro. He's really doing it just to protect his brother, I think, because he wanted to make sure that at least if he's the stronger one, then he should be able to take down Musashi. And if he wasn't as strong as he thought he was, then he would have been able to survive that fight. But obviously we saw that Musashi was actually stronger, and now he managed to actually take him down. What's interesting, I was just catching up to just now, was about obviously now Madahachi is actually viewing the real Sasaki Kojiro, since they're crossing paths right now, because we've been waiting so long for the real Sasaki Kojiro now to show up, and we thought he was dead. That obviously in the previous arc, the great arc, man, that was fucking beautiful. But coming from the last arc, now we know that he's actually around. It's gonna be interesting to see how these two interact, Madahachi and Sasaki, actually have beef with each other, or if they're actually gonna just become friends maybe, or if maybe they won't even talk really. It's gonna be really interesting to see where the story goes for the next couple chapters. Alright guys, that was my off-the-cuff reaction of the past 100 chapters that I read in a day in the past 24 hours. It's one of the best arcs I've ever read, I think, with the Kojiro arc, continuing with the greatness of Vagabond, and I hope that keeps getting better and better. Even though I know the series is on hiatus right now, by the time I catch up, I want to see how I feel about the whole story so far, and I'm curious if the hiatus will end anytime soon. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts about my review and what I've said so far. And again, have a good one.